Bonjour. C'est un plaisir d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. Malheureusement, je ne parle pas français. So this presentation, as I just said, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Oh, sorry, is it very loud? Okay. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you today. And, I think this is a really amazing camp, and I want to thank everyone here for coming, and also to the entire organizing staff here for the invitation. Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. So, as I mentioned, unfortunately, this is basically the only slide that has any French on it. So if you'll bear with me, I will be giving this presentation in English. Just to introduce myself, my name is Preston So. I am a member of the Office of the CTO at Acquia. We work, as Omar mentioned, directly with Drupal and directly advancing the Drupal community. I've actually been in the Drupal community for about 10 years now, and I have a little bit of a story to tell today about myself and about the way that Drupal has progressed since then. Alongside that, however, I'm also the development manager, the head of Acquia Labs, which is a new department of Acquia focused on innovation and experimental projects. If you'd like to learn more about Acquia Labs, please feel free to come and talk to me afterwards. Who remembers Spark? Anyone in this room worked on Spark or remembers Spark? So about 5 years ago, I was part of that team, doing a little bit of prototyping work for them. And so a lot of these topics about the editorial experience and the way that Drupal is handling how it works with editors is a very near and dear topic to my heart. If you'd like to get in contact with me, there's my email address, there's my Twitter handle, and a hashtag if you'd like to push some questions at me live. So here's what we're going to cover today. I really want this to be a keynote where we kind of take a step back. And I know that this whole weekend is about Drupal, but I really want to get back to the very beginning. How many people have had more than a couple of years working on Drupal, or have used Drupal for more than a couple of years? So there's quite a few people in this room. And a lot of you probably remember the first day that you worked with Drupal. The first thing I want to do is I want to try to recapture that sense of wonder that we had when we first began working with Drupal. And I want to get a sense of what that was like. I want to get a sense of what content means in our world today. What exactly is content? And how has that meaning of content shifted? And how are we working to address that shift in meaning? Then, I want to talk about something that's going to be a little bit interesting, which is this completely unachievable idea of the perfect content management system. It doesn't exist, will never exist. But I'd like to talk a little bit about how that would work. I want to talk a little bit about a concept that I've been working on over the last couple of months, trying to get a sense of what this might mean conceptually. And I really want to get your help. And I'd like to open this up for discussion at the very end. I want to talk about this idea of universal editing, or content agnostic editing. And I'd like to get a sense of how people feel about this. And finally, I want to end with a bit of an epilogue about Drupal's third decade. As many of you might know, Drupal is currently in its 17th year of existence, which is a huge achievement for our community and also for the entire project. What might years 20 through 30 look like? And how are we going to adjust to make that happen? So just to start off, I want to really go back to basics. And I want to think about the way in which Drupal has become what it is today. And the first thing I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about my own experience. And that is that ever since 2004, I've been working as a freelancer, not so much anymore. But I still remember having to work on websites that were flat assets, HTML, CSS, just flat files that we upload via FTP. How many people worked in that world before Drupal, where you were just uploading static files, making their clients use HTML potentially, or having webmasters do the work for you? Well, I still remember the very first day that I discovered Drupal. And I still remember the very first day that I opened up CCK and Views, and I was like, this is revelatory. I mean, this is truly amazing. And what that really made click in my head is this idea that the web is meant to be democratic. The web is meant to be open. The web is meant to be accessible to everybody, open to everybody who wants to have a part and a say in it. And this is a very important concept, because when you think about it, back in the 1990s and 2000s, you and I, we developers, were the only people who were able to actually access that world. And by actually providing a content management system, by providing the means for editors and marketers and site builders and our friends and family and our grandma and even our dogs to be able to edit websites. That's a really big deal. Do you remember your first CMS experience? Do you remember? It doesn't have to be Drupal, but I want to think for a moment about what that was like. What it was like for you to go up to a client and say, you know what, you can do this yourself. Of course, that means a lot more sleep for all of us, and a lot fewer issues of work that we have to address. But we have to keep in mind that there's always two components, and there have always been two components to Drupal. The first is the code, and that's a lot of what we've been talking about this weekend. I've seen and heard a lot of sessions about very, very interesting topics, and I do appreciate that this is not PHP, by the way. This is ES6. It's up there for a reason, though. But the thing is, we developers are only part of the audience here, and it's very important to remember that. As we know, Drupal has a user experience that is able to provide editors everything that they need to be successful. The second half of Drupal is really about the editing capabilities. It's really about the editorial interface. It's about the editorial experience that people can provide and that people can leverage. So Drupal's unique position and Drupal's unique value proposition is that power to provide simultaneously that unique power to both editors and developers. We have not only an incredible developer experience in Drupal 8, we have an incredible ability to do things in Drupal, and also in Backdrop as well. But we also have the ability to allow our editors to have complete control over what they can do with their websites and what they can do with their content. This is a good thing, but a lot of things have changed in the last 17 years. A lot of things have really shifted. And one of the things that I really want us to think about is widening our impression of what content actually is and what content means. Because content is no longer just about the traditional web-based content that we were used to in terms of text and images and the web-based content. When we all first started out, this was the sort of thing that you would often see, is one of these websites that would have text, images, and really not much else. And that's really all websites were back in the day. They were large swaths of primarily narrative text, primarily expository text. It wasn't really catchy, it wasn't really meant to be snappy per se. It was meant to be it was meant to be explanatory, right? It was meant to be something that was a really great context for long-form text. You had images interspersed throughout, and more images came into being. And sometimes they would span the entire viewport. They would stretch across the entire screen. But back in those days, back in the 2000s, especially when Drupal first started out, you would have some certain multimedia. You would have videos, you might have audio, but those would be very tightly scoped to the page, to certain components of the page, and really would be synonymous with images. And finally, the interactions that we would undertake in order to actually be able to use these kinds of things were limited to a keyboard and to a mouse. Then we have the shift towards mobile. We have this idea that smaller screens can also be usable and can also be a means of consuming content in a very compelling way. You have the same kind of long-form text, but that is going to stretch across the entire screen in a responsive context. You have images and multimedia, but these are going to stretch across the entire screen. You have this interesting loss of surface area. No longer are you experiencing things in a very desktop-like way. You're experiencing things in a very linear and vertical way that can oftentimes be very limiting in terms of a responsive context. And we have to think about that in a very different way. And primarily, the interactions that you would do would be things like tap, or swipe, or pinch and zoom. And there would be nothing that would involve a keyboard or a mouse necessarily. We also, in the Spark team, and this is actually a screenshot that probably no one in this room has ever seen before, because this is actually a prototype that I built 5 years ago. This is an example of mobile-first editing. And we went through a period in Drupal where that was a very important concern. This idea that you should be able to edit a Drupal site seamlessly on your mobile device. This is a really revolutionary idea. This is something that really took hold in our community and became a very important concept. And still today, we are able to leverage things like mobile-first editing. But there's still more things that are happening. That's not just the end of where content is going to end up. We've also got things like digital signage on Times Square, for instance, or in universities like here at Concordia. You see screens that display information that might be coming from Drupal, that might be coming from somewhere else. How does that content fit in to the way that we think about Drupal? Well, digital signage is different. It's totally different because it has larger text. You have to have legibility. And that legibility means that you have a limited opportunity for coexistence between different kinds of content. You can't necessarily have multimedia necessarily in the same way. You can't have things coexist in the same way that you would on a website, in much the same way that you would on a cell phone. And there's no really direct interaction. It's a primarily passive interaction. You're receiving this information. You're not able to interact with it in any way. You're not able to gesture or change the way that that content appears to you. We also have wearable technology now. And this is in the last few years. We have Apple Watches, and we have different pieces of content that are coming through in the form of push notifications or in the form of other things and updates to our wearable devices. And the screens are getting even smaller at this point. This limited real estate, again, means that there's no coexistence between different types of content. It's just a single tweet or a single push notification, nothing else. And these interactions are solely through gestures as well. You can see where I'm going here, which is that a lot of the ways that we think about content and the way that we've historically and traditionally thought about content are being completely upended by the way that our technologies and our devices are evolving at an extremely rapid pace. We also have set-top boxes, and this is probably an area that you might not have heard a lot about, but things like Roku or Samsung TV. A lot of people use these things now, and a lot of these applications can actually consume content directly from Drupal. But the thing is, the content display is completely locked down, much like the Apple Watch. You can't really do anything with it. It's limited to what Roku provides you in terms of their API. You have to adhere to their template. You have to adhere to exactly the way that they do things. And that's a really big shift as well, because as people who are really used to being able to really control a lot of that experience, we as designers and we as developers are unable to exert as much of that control. And of course, you use a remote control to interact with that. We also have things like augmented reality, which is a very new trend that's happening right now. There's a lot of actually new CMS solutions that are evolving in terms of augmented reality. Things like Layar, for instance, which is a very new CMS that's just evolved. Augmented reality is a little bit more flexible, but the content is purely situational. The content that you get is only going to be accessible, it's only going to be visible in a certain situation that you find yourself in. And it's all superimposed situationally. You're never going to actually get a true context of every single piece of content that's available, because that would be overwhelming in this kind of an experience. And you have interactions via gestures, potentially, in terms of your smartphone, camera, or whatever you might have on your iPad, but also motion. When I walk over here, I might get a totally different experience in terms of my content and the content that I get versus when I'm over here. It's something that I like to call content proprioception. And one of the things that's really shifted as well is this idea of zero user interfaces. Zero user interfaces, or zero UIs, are interfaces that have no graphical interface at all, that have no screen at all. And conversational interfaces are primarily oral. Content is inaccessible, actually, unless you take a certain series of decisions that will access that content for you, or get you to the content that you need in that particular context. You have to have utterances be the way in which you interact with this content now. And the interactions take place via dialogue. And there's a lot of implications here in terms of conversational content, because a lot of the ways that we thought about accessibility, for instance, in terms of assistive technologies like screen readers or refreshable braille displays, things of that nature, are really shifting in this new world of conversational interfaces, which really enable a new way of thinking about the way that we access our content. So where am I going with all of this? Where I'm going with all of this is we have absolutely no idea what's around the corner. I mean, for all intents and purposes, next year, right, we might be having our thermostats display Drupal content, or our fridges displaying Drupal content, or even our chairs displaying Drupal content, or even our hair, like, reading content off to us. I mean, the possibilities are endless. And that's really what I want to instill as part of this presentation today, is that we have to be prepared to accept that there's no possible way to 100% predict what is going to happen to content in the future. We're moving away from this idea of standalone digital experiences. Back in the 2000s, you might have a native mobile app and you might have a website, but those two things potentially would be using completely different content or completely different databases. Today, we now have entire ecosystems of content, which are surrounding this whole kind of series of contexts through a content store. And oftentimes today, that content store is Drupal. We're moving away from this idea of pulling our content, from actually requesting our content directly from a website by loading a page. And we're moving towards push-based content delivery, where content is actually coming directly to us. And that's also a very influential and revolutionary change. Finally, we're no longer consumers of content. We're no longer these passive patients of content. We are now active agents in interacting with our content. We are actually communicating and having a dialogue and having a conversation with our content. This brings me to the idea of what a perfect content management system is, or could be. Because when you think about it, all of these new trends that are happening in terms of the explosion of channels, in terms of the nature of how we're able to interact with our content today, and it's not just a one-way street, it's bidirectional, that kind of shift in thinking is leading to a really profound shift in the way that content management really should work. Think about how we're using Drupal today. And think about what Drupal is capable of today. Drupal is capable of making websites, making web-based content. Drupal is capable of making mobile, responsive websites. Drupal is capable of a lot of different things. Drupal is also capable of housing content and providing that content for a whole variety of different channels that you would never expect to see. And all of that, in essence, makes Drupal invisible oftentimes. There's one single value proposition that Drupal has had since its very inception. Since the very beginning of Drupal, there have been 3 people that have benefited the most from Drupal. The first is the developer, a lot of us in this room, who benefit from that flexibility, that ability to extend Drupal through modules and themes that we can insert ourselves. The marketer, and this is a catch-all to include people who are editors or site builders or marketers or people who are working just in your mom and pop shop, updating the website. All of these people benefit from the things that we have built into Drupal 8. Things like in-place editing, things like responsive administration, things like contextual links, and that kind of unique editorial access that those contextual tools provide. And then finally, the end user, who is actually the recipient of all of this. And whatever this user experience is that we build in conjunction with the developer, in conjunction with the marketer, is really what the user is going to get. And the user in this case is really unaware of what's going on behind the scenes. They really have no idea. They have no idea if it's the developer who's done all the work or if it's the marketer who's done all the work. And that's one of the really interesting characteristics of Drupal, in my opinion. So I want to ask a question, which is the traditional CMS. The traditional CMS that we have known up until today, Joomla, WordPress, Drupal. Is it dead? Is it done? Is it done for? Are we entering a world where the idea of a CMS is completely irrelevant? I don't know. But one thing I can say is that the CMS that we have today, that we know of and we understand traditionally to be the CMS, is indeed that. Because of the fact that all of this content is shifting and everything is moving in a different direction. Now, once again, I want to say this is my opinion, and you can feel free to throw some tomatoes at me. It'll wash out. It's fine. But what I want to get at here is that we have to take a step back and think about what is it that we're trying to achieve, and what is it that our goals are. And I know that that's a very polemical statement, but I'm going somewhere with this, which is I want to talk about how we can actually provide for this widening, unexplored territory of digital experiences that we have never even imagined could exist yet. And we're also contending with a very unique, different trend, which is that there are now CMSes that don't even exist yet that are coming at our heels and very quickly approaching the way that Drupal has operated in terms of other channels. Examples like Layout, or examples, for example, like Node.js-driven CMSes like Keystone. These are all very important trends, and these are things that will continue to shape the way that we think about Drupal in the future. So what exactly would be the CMS of the future? And this is, once again, is something that I really want to think about and process. And I'd love to hear your thoughts as well and really get a sense of what you're thinking. The CMS of the future requires a completely different approach when it comes to what marketers call omnichannel. What people call the omnichannel approach is every channel of content, every possible touch point of content is considered this kind of approach. The developer retains that immense flexibility that they've always had. The marketer can use that same contextualized experience, the same experience that they use on a Drupal website, should be the same experience they can use on a conversational interface, potentially. How would that look? How might that appear? And how might we design that UI? And how might we design those interactions? But most critically, the user should be able to experience content on any possible channel using this ideal CMS of the future. We have new channels that are coming about every day, and there's no way to avoid this. There's things that are happening, we have new things that are coming about, new ways, new interactions that are happening with Drupal. And we also have channels that we've never heard of yet, and that will be coming about in the next 5 to 10 years. And we have absolutely no idea what they could be. One of the things that has really improved Drupal's situation in this regard is, of course, API-first Drupal, or decoupled Drupal. How many people have heard of headless or decoupled Drupal? Great. So, this is a really important concept that's really come about in the last couple of years in Drupal. And for those of you who don't know, this idea of decoupled or API-first Drupal, I'm using API-first here for a particular reason. It's the underlying approach that permits you to have this intercommunication with other applications and other systems, whether that's set-top boxes or an AR headset or anything that involves a different thing from Drupal. And decoupled Drupal, and this is a very simple way of saying it, but decoupled Drupal really enables you to speak Drupal. And I know that's a very gross oversimplification, but in essence, it really does allow you to communicate uniquely with Drupal. But only having robust APIs isn't really enough. When you think about these new headless CMS platforms that are coming up, how many people have heard of things like Contentful or Prismic or Cloud CMS? These are interesting new platforms that are primarily serving solely as content repositories. They're nothing more than just a glorified content store where editors can put in content. And all the front end, or all the exposed piece is just APIs that you can consume. But there's a cautionary tale here, and there's some caveats here, which is that for people who are really used to that unique marketability, that unique marketing experience that Drupal provides in terms of site building and layout management and in-place editing, all of these really amazing things and amazing features that we have in Drupal 8, that's not possible in any of these platforms. That's not possible in most of these. Prismic is the only one that's really begun to move towards this kind of idea. And so this is just a quick illustration of what this looks like, just to give you an impression for those of you who are interested. But the takeaway here is that Drupal is splitting up into multiple pieces, multiple components when it comes to an experience where Drupal is solely an API-first store. There's a second thing also that I think is very important when it comes to providing for what could be the next perfect CMS, and that is the editorial experience. Oftentimes, what developers want is in complete opposition to what marketers want. I think a lot of us have experienced that in our conversations with our customers. For example, there's a lot of developers who really want JavaScript framework agnosticism. There's this new kind of trend in development, front-end development, to use JavaScript frameworks. But the thing is, a lot of people want to use whatever they want in conjunction with a Drupal backend. But the problem is, to build these contextualized front-end tools, to build these things like in-place editing, layout management, into these decoupled front-ends, into these JavaScript-based front-ends, into these new, completely separated from Drupal front-ends, it's impossible to do so unless you choose a framework, or potentially unless you build it in a very certain way. And this is a very big lift. And oftentimes, we have this very important tension between what developers want and what developers want. And one interesting case here is Calypso. WordPress recently released, about a year or two ago, a new single-page application in React that is essentially an editorial interface for WordPress. But they decided to keep the front end in PHP, which is, I think, a smart move on their part. But there's a big problem here, and that is the divergence between what marketers expect when it comes to layout management, when it comes to in-place editing and those kinds of features, and what developers are actually using, and what they're actually using, and what these editors are actually using on the back end. Another case, for example, Laravel recently adopted Vue.js as a JavaScript framework, as a canonical framework. And Prismic has recently begun to insert edit buttons on its decoupled front ends. You can inject edit buttons onto your decoupled front end, which will take you all the way back to the Prismic editorial interface. These kinds of experiences are really educational for us and really important for us to think about as we move forward. But I want to pose some questions here. And these questions actually, believe it or not, have already been answered by folks in the Drupal community. For example, how do you edit digital signage? There are modules available for doing this. There are ways of doing digital signage within the context of Drupal. How do you edit content driven by augmented and virtual reality? How do you edit content that's going to end up on an Oculus Rift? How do you edit content when it comes to a Google Glass? But how do you edit that content in the same way that you would edit a page on a Drupal site? And that's where the rub is. How would you edit conversational content? How would you edit content that goes towards an Amazon Echo? How would you do that? And how would that work in a Drupal context? Because fundamentally, we have a new, what I would call an incongruity in Drupal. We have this really unique value proposition, this really premium nexus that we're at, this awesome centerpiece that we're occupying right now in this ecosystem and in the general world, which is these three personas: the user, the marketer, and editor, and the developer. Are those three personas fundamentally irreconcilable? That's the question I want to pose. Here's the problem that we're facing today. And it's not necessarily a problem if we want to make it, if we want to go a certain direction. And I want to be very clear about that in the next few slides. Which is that right now, our site builders and our marketers and our editors and our people who are working and using Drupal as an admin tool, as an editorial interface, can really only do a lot when it comes to websites and when it comes to responsive web experiences. They can't do the same kinds of things that they have done in terms of mobile, set-top boxes, augmented reality, digital signage, the list goes on. Now, what I want to be very clear about is this is not necessarily a bad thing. And I want to be very clinical about this by saying that this incongruity could be a good thing for us, or it could be a bad thing for us. And it's something that I want to remain impartial about because it's something that I am also giving a lot of thought to. But fundamentally, the difference is that developers can do all of these things. Developers can go ahead and do all of these things. But wasn't Drupal's original proposition was to empower the user of these tools? Wasn't it to empower the marketer and empower the editor to do these things? It's a very interesting question. We have an interesting quandary right now, which is that better for users, when we say better for users, what's better for user experience? We're not necessarily considering that better for users might mean better on more channels, better on more devices, because users have come to expect that kind of seamlessness across all of their devices. They've come to expect that same branding, that same experience, that same idea, that same context with which you approach all of this content on every single device. And so I like to consider this graph right here, which is that there's an interesting dilemma that we have in Drupal, which is we have these two axes. And one of them is better for developers, the y-axis, and one of them is better for marketers. And historically, we've been at this very sweet spot right here, which is what's better for users is something that's good for both, because developers can keep building these awesome experiences that users will love. And marketers can also continue building these experiences that users will love without a huge amount of lift. We're facing a bit of an issue here. That slide that I showed you that shows these things going in a different direction is causing us to become more developer-oriented. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because as I said, once again, maybe this idea that better for users is better on more devices, maybe that's wrong. And maybe that's not where Drupal should focus. Maybe that's not where our bread and butter should be. But what's happening more and more is that when we talk about other devices and we talk about other channels, what's better for users and what's a better outcome for users usually means that there's more custom work by developers in the Drupal ecosystem. Now, whether or not that's a bad thing is up for debate. But what I want to be very clear about is that, this is something that we do have to contend with. This kind of evolution that we're facing, this progression of Drupal that we're facing, it is something that we are going to have to talk about and really think about critically. So what is this idea of universal editing that I really want to talk about and think about with you all today? Well, is it the idea of editing everywhere? Is it the idea of being able to edit on a mobile device, for instance? We already tried it. We did it with responsive editing. We did it. And Drupal is responsive and mobile first in this strict sense. But most people will still go to their desktop for more complex operations. Things like doing any sort of really complex WYSIWYG or doing anything like working with the Views UI, they will still go back to the desktop for doing those things. And in that way, even however much work we pump into making Drupal's editorial experience mobile first, or really mobile ready, the full breadth of functionality is still, to the user of those systems, not necessarily going to be readily available. And on certain devices, the user experience of this does deteriorate considerably because there is no way to actually account for all those possible devices and viewports. I want to shift our mentality away from this idea of edit everywhere or edit on all devices towards edit everything. And what I mean by edit everything is a channel agnostic approach, an approach where you don't necessarily rely on these other devices for editing. You can edit every channel on Drupal, what I will call quote-unquote Drupal, through outside-in interfaces and API-first Drupal. You have a consistent and seamless user experience across all of these different channels and all these different experiences that you're editing, but you're still fundamentally using the same interface. But here's the real challenge, and this is what I really want to think about today. And in my ideal world, in my sort of dream world, it's that Drupal, for other experiences, Drupal for these other things like digital signage, conversational interfaces, chatbots, Drupal for these other experiences should, in a sense, be indistinguishable from Drupal for web experiences. What that looks like, I don't know. But one thing I do want to point out is that we do have a lot of this thinking happening right now in terms of outside-in interfaces, in the context of what if we can actually provide an off-canvas or a sidebar and different kind of approach to providing contextualized administration, where what's actually in the middle here is potentially an if this then that type decision flow for conversational interfaces, or overlays that we know will be superimposed at certain points when you're using augmented reality. This is the kind of thinking that I want to move towards in terms of what we're doing. And these outside-in interfaces are really important in the context of evolving on the way that we're thinking about Drupal. Because in this sense, if we apply this to every single possibility that we know of when it comes to Drupal, it's a really powerful idea. You can use the exact same place block system, you can use the exact same menu editing system to be what you use for these other devices. Of course, what that looks like, or what that would look like, is very much a very difficult question. So here's some food for thought. What does this mean? Well, it means that it potentially means making some difficult decisions. And what I want to say here is that some of these things might make some people, a little bit concerned or a little bit, you might want to throw some tomatoes at me. But I want to just pose all of these different ideas because these are all different things that I've heard talked about in the community. And I want to see what exactly we want to do as a community. Maybe what it actually means, for the future of Drupal, what it actually means is that we prestige the editor and the marketer over the developer. We really do become more like WordPress with their awful code and their awful, it's really bad. By the way, if you haven't looked at WordPress's code. I'm sorry, Matt Mullenweg, if you're in the room. Maybe it means prestiging the developer over the editor. Maybe it means that we become a developer-focused thing. Maybe we go more in the direction of Laravel, for example, or Symfony. Maybe it means that we try our best to maintain the status quo. And of course, what the status quo means also is something that we don't necessarily know. What happens if we value the editor and marketer over the developer? Well, it means certain sacrifices that we have to make as developers. Maybe it means adopting a JavaScript framework for a decoupled front end because we want to make those tools available on those front ends for those marketers and those editors, and to focus only on web experiences. Maybe it means that we emulate or we approximate these devices, provide high-fidelity previews or these complicated emulations within the context of the Drupal user interface, to allow for these outside-in interactions to take place. If we work on improving the developer experience first and foremost, maybe it means that we adopt a more agnostic approach to all of this. We don't adopt a framework, we don't do any of these things, we don't actually have any sort of opinion. And we provide components that force the developer to finish the job, to go and finish and actually pass the baton to the developer and have them go forward and finish what they're actually trying to accomplish. Maybe it means, as some people have discussed, becoming solely that API-first system, solely that content repository, solely that headless CMS, much like Contentful, that is only about the back end and lets the developers do the heavy lifting from the front. But once again, there is also the other option, which is to keep the status quo and to keep the same landscape that we have always been historically as intact as we possibly can. And I think that's also a possibility here. But once again, what I want to point out here is that we do have this interesting quandary, which is that in the past, we only ever had to worry about the bottom two when it came to both our developers and our editors. This chart, this kind of illustration is going to grow vertically. We're going to have to start to deal with a whole lot more. And I think there's always going to be an issue where we track ahead as developers in terms of our developer experience and our ability to build these kinds of systems ahead of what the marketer actually is able to consume. Whatever the case, we have to be prepared, I think, that the ideal future state of Drupal is not necessarily what we have today. That could be a good thing, that could be a bad thing, but I think we do have to accept that. We have to be prepared that Drupal might be made up of many disparate parts. For example, at DrupalCon New Orleans recently, DrupalCon Dublin, we had a conversation about maybe splitting Drupal up into separate parts, both written in PHP. So you have Twig on one side and all of the Drupal APIs in the back end on the other side. We are entering Drupal's third decade. We're 17 years in. We're getting to a point where there's going to be more in Drupal's future. There's going to be a lot more happening here. This is the great test, I believe. This evolution in the way that we're working with the web, the way that the entire idea of content is shifting completely away from what we thought of up until this moment today in this room. This is the great test. This is the great challenge that is going to help us dictate the next decade of Drupal. Where do you want Drupal to be in 2030? I think every one of us in this room can come right back here, sit in these exact same seats in this very room that gives me kind of a lot of stress because it's like an exam room. But every one of us can sit right back here in the same room 13 years from now in 2030. And I think we can still have a job. And I think we can still have a really bright future in Drupal. The proof is in the pudding. And I think this is the really important thing that I want to get across, is that a multifaceted Drupal, and that word multifaceted is up for debate. Could be polyglossic, which means multiple languages, JavaScript and PHP. Could be multifaceted as in many different devices and channels that are being addressed. Could be multifaceted in terms of different personas that we're considering. But a multifaceted Drupal, however you want to interpret that, is a more future-proof Drupal, is a more successful Drupal in the long run. And thanks to all of you in this room, I believe, even though we're 17 years into Drupal's history, that Drupal's story and Drupal's myth and Drupal's epic has only just begun. And this is a milestone right here that we have in this room. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. I'll go ahead and take some questions now, or tomatoes, if you want to throw them at me as well. Or we can open it up for some discussion. What I would like to do is to have a little bit of dialogue about some of these ideas and some of the issues that I raised here. Yes?
So we work for 2 national museums, and we've touched, I'm going to throw you some flowers because it's been a challenge trying to find a EMS system, which a CMS would be part of it. We deal with multifaceted, like we talked about, touch screens within the exhibits. So we're looking at mobile apps, digital signage throughout the entire museums. So there's a lot of different channels that we deal with, and we deal with the same content for most of these little different elements. And this is what we've been trying to figure out: what part or where the data will actually be residing for us to be able to edit in one place, to be able to navigate through all these different channels. So you're bang on, basically, of what Drupal and the future of Drupal for choices like organizations like ours, like it's where we're going. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that feedback. I wish I could repeat all of that for the recording, but that's a lot. So I'll kind of respond to that a little bit, actually, because I think we're in a really interesting time right now. We're in a time where a lot of the things that we want to happen, as you mentioned, in terms of museologically, the idea of augmented reality, like I showed earlier, is a really, really compelling idea. You know, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, for example, did a pilot program using augmented reality to allow for you to detect, you know, get the medium, get the information about the artist. And this is a really important kind of thing, which is, you know, you mentioned that you want to have this content all housed in Drupal and edited in Drupal. What I would, you know, one of the things that I think is also important is how will the people who work at those museums be able to actually do those kinds of operations in a way that allows them to see those things in action or preview them in action. And that could be a DevOps approach where you have a staging environment where that's just kind of where you know, paint just to get all of the kinds of AR, the AR overlays that you might be looking for. Or it could be, for example, that you know, you're actually seeing those things directly on your screen while you're editing Drupal. That's a really kind of interesting discussion to have, especially in the context of augmented reality, which is really where I think the most promise for these kinds of ideas lies. Omar.
One of the things that strikes me is, like, when you look at these devices with no interfaces, sometimes what you're interacting with is not structured content on the other side, or maybe structured somewhat, but it's AI curated content as opposed to human curated content. And I think that's a shift. Like, more and more of the content I'm interacting with is AI curated and not humans clicking on Drupal or something like that. And finally, obviously there's going to be need for humans still in there, but it's going to be blending those two experiences together, I think, is one of the additional things that comes into.
Yeah, just to reiterate the comment, it's you know, this idea of AI, machine learning, being used to actually dictate the way the content ends up and the way the content is disposed. I think that what we're going to see more and more is that humans and the editors that are human, unless there's some aliens that I don't know of, but these humans that are working with this content are going to have to orchestrate these machine learning algorithms and these AI approaches in a very unique way, whether that's through segmentation or even higher level things that will involve this algorithmic approach to content. And that's one of the interesting things is that, you know, when we take a step back even further from that kind of experience where you're not directly editing the content, you're not directly doing that sort of A/B testing, right? And it's happening automatically, and that's really being something that's done just by virtue of machine learning existing on the Drupal CMS. What does that actually mean for the editorial experience as well? It's a very compelling idea, which is, you know, once you actually introduce more and more AI, you know, how does the human experience shift? And that's something actually that I purposely didn't talk about in this because I think it's a whole huge can of worms, and we have absolutely no idea where that could go. And that's really one of those kinds of channels that I think, I mean, not channels, but I guess, you know, sort of context that's going to really shift the way that we think about content in a very fundamental way, and may actually result in, you know, the CMS really becoming more like a DMS, like a decision management system, right? Yes?
Since AI is mostly like in Python, usually, what is your thought about like PHP code, like keeping like Drupal and PHP and seeing like a big distance between the new components?
Sure. So the question was about AI being written primarily these days in Python or other well, you know, Python. And given that Drupal is written primarily in PHP, how does that shift our thinking about components of PHP and components of Drupal? Well, as I said, you know, when I say multifaceted and you know, when I say things like polyglossic, where you have many different languages at play, whether it's JavaScript, whether it's Python, whether it's Ruby, whether it's Perl. I mean, sorry, I just gave a lot of people in this room the shivers. You know, the thing about the way that things are shifting today is we're seeing this really fundamental shift towards service-oriented architecture as well. This idea that you should have single-purpose services that are really focused on a single thing that they're trying to accomplish. And oftentimes, I think that if we can really isolate those inputs and outputs and really get a sense of what those APIs would look like, I see absolutely no reason why Drupal, as a concept, can't have a Python-based AI system built into it as well, a Python-based service built into it as well. Because this is something I had a really interesting conversation about last year at MidCamp with Daniel Vayner, D.A. Vayner on Drupal.org. And one of the things he said to me really stuck with me for a very long time, which is that Drupal is not a PHP or a PHP software project or a software project. And don't get me wrong, I love PHP. I've worked in PHP for a long time. I love PHP 7. I think that a lot of the things that we have built in Drupal are really evocative of the kind of upper limits and the higher echelons of PHP. But what he said to me interestingly was, no, Drupal is actually an idea. Drupal is a community. Drupal is a concept. Drupal is not a software project, a single software project. And if we can get towards that mentality where Drupal is a concept, and Drupal could be a collection of services, or Drupal could be an AI service plus a front end built in JavaScript plus a back, whatever. I think that's a really revolutionary way of thinking. And if we can begin to think about how that might fit in, I think we'll really be serving ourselves very well. Now, what I don't want to necessarily say to a lot of people in this room is that, we should strip Drupal of all of its PHP or completely tear apart the fabric of Drupal in terms of what it's been written in. But I think if we can iterate on some of these ideas and begin to explore what pieces of Drupal or what extensions of Drupal could be in these different languages, in these different architectures, I think that's a really, really compelling idea. And, that's something that we should really explore as a group. Yes, Omar.
Another thing that strikes me is, I remember, like you said, back in the day, making static files, and you had tools like Dreamweaver, terrible, but great at the same time. I mean, it had a lot of adoption because it was easy to use, and it was terrible for all the architectural problems and stuff that it created. But I think as a community, we've suffered a lot for not having easy to theme kind of options. Even Photoshop, you just drag a bunch of rectangles on your thing, press export, and you had some kind of web page with all your images and stuff. And as imperfect as those were, I'm surprised that we're so far down the line and don't have a equivalent type thing where let me just stick my designer's thing in the background and start drawing some squares around there and getting something out of it. And going towards headless and all that, interesting, great, but I'm still worried that the mom and pops are left behind and all this, and that's why WordPress, as imperfect as it is getting so much adoption and stuff. So I hope that the future does involve also some love towards the kind of the themers who don't work in giant, don't have huge budgets and these kind of things. And I love that we've made Drupal a tool that can be accessible, the right tool for enterprises, but I don't think that should be at the expense of the mom and pops. And so the theming element, I think, is a key one.
Yeah, just to kind of distill that into a couple of points, I think this idea of back in the day where we had Dreamweaver and, dare I say, Fireworks or Front Page. These kinds of tools have really made and enabled a wide variety of these mom and pop shops and these small businesses to really succeed. And Drupal, could be perceived as lacking in those regards as compared to WordPress, or at least in terms of the ways in which you can really change the way that Drupal looks and feels. I think there's two interesting ideas here. And also you mentioned, of course, headless being something that might leave these folks behind. I think there's two ideas here that are very important to point out. The first is this idea of editorial friction. You have this problem where as much as you want to provide people with those limitless capabilities, those WYSIWYG tools, those kinds of things that really enable the non-technical person to go, and I shouldn't use that because it's a little pejorative, but those who are in the community who are not developing, per se, to be able to do these things in a very easy way. That's a very interesting proposition. The problem with that, of course, is that you generate a lot of these kinds of bad code. Oftentimes you get really kludgy setups that are really hard to really tear away from, and that does pose a significant problem that I do think we have to address. That being said, I think there's a second idea here that is also very important to call out, which is that a lot of times, we think about I think we think about these things in perhaps a very interesting way, in that we're focused on what can we do for the editors with our current way of thinking and our current thinking and our current set of tools and our current toolbox. And I think that if we can think about what does the mom and pop shop want when it comes to their user experience, their in-place editing tools, their layout management, and how can we make sure that those needs are still addressed, especially in the headless environment, right? Whether that is through adopting a single framework to be that single source of truth for editing that those folks can actually use and really have a good time using as well, and have a lot of that control. There's an interesting project, actually, that I want to call out, which is, so Polymer. How many people have heard of Polymer? So Polymer is like this Google Web Components. So Polymer back in the day was a polyfill for web components that Google built. And now it's become this totally crazy community and ecosystem of different components that you can actually put directly into your website, which are these Polymer components, and use these kind of Polymer ideas. And there's all sorts of interesting problems with Polymer, like they have, Web Components has the shadow DOM, Polymer has the shady DOM, it's really shady. I haven't looked at Polymer in a while, but one of the interesting things about Polymer is they have this website called, and it's slipping my mind right now, Polymer, I think it's like, I don't know, Iron or something. It's this site that allows you to design Polymer components using a WYSIWYG editor. In the same way that you would drag in like form elements, you would drag in, like you use it and it feels exactly like Front Page, or feels exactly like Dreamweaver back in the day. And what's interesting about this whole thing is that it really does try to actually produce really good code as well in addition to that. And I need to really get that. I wish I wasn't having a memory block right now, because I really want to get that name. But these components, perhaps that is the way that we try to get into this kind of realm, by allowing for limited portions of the page and limited components to be really flexibly edited in those ways and manipulated in that sense. But I think that in particular raises some really interesting points about this friction between what editors want and the control that editors want, and the nightmares that we developers get when we have to go through and look at some of this code that's generated. I mean, I remember I once had a front page project handed off to me. This is about 10 years ago, and I had to just start from scratch. I mean, you just can't do anything with it. You just can't. So, thank you, Omar. Yeah. Yes, Jess.
So who pays for it? The experiences that you're describing are ambitious. I'm using that word, I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek and cheeky about it. But right now we have software that's mostly still being maintained by volunteers. And increasingly, the work that's being described here it's a lot of work. And a lot of work means it's not going to happen in donated time in any short amount of time in a high-quality way that provides a seamless user experience. So, how do we still give the mom and pop? I wish you'd stop saying that. But how do we still give that love to small organizations that can't invest that volunteer time?
So I 100% agree with you. The question is, who pays for it when we want to provide these seamless experiences that are ambitious? I'm going to use that word because I think that's a good way of describing it. That handles all of these different channels and handles all these different things and is able to do all the things that we want to do, that we dream of. And how exactly do we manage to get a primarily volunteer effort to coalesce around some ideas like this?
You missed some of my snark, which is why should we expect a volunteer-driven effort to?
Why should we expect volunteers to do this? I think there's a couple of answers, one of which most in this room will not like, and I don't like either, and one of which is an answer that I think is much more difficult. But we are in a very, obviously I don't believe that any of this is achievable with what we have today. And the first kind of proposal, right? And I've done something, thinking about this. Jeff knows I'm doing a lot of thinking about this. The first proposal is that we expand our ecosystem, right? Is that we try to engage with other communities, and we try to figure out what our common areas and our common kinds of entry points are, and our common needs are, and try to figure out how we can combine with those communities. There's been a very interesting and very rich collaboration happening already right now between the Ember.js and Drupal communities, for instance. One of the core maintainers of Ember at Faulkner has been doing a phenomenal amount of work assisting us with our JSON API module, assisting us in general with a lot of the things that we do. And he's spoken at several DrupalCons at this point. And it could be that, I'm not going to say necessarily certain words that will probably make everyone scream and leave this room, like merge, but what I will say is that doing more to collaborate and to explore different ideas with these communities is going to lead to a better outcome for both of our communities. This kind of, the open source community, and I'm talking not just about Drupal, but the overarching free and open source software community is a community that relies on mutualistic, codependent, very, sort of mutually beneficial ideas. This idea that everyone has something to offer, and everything that we do and we contribute back is going to improve everybody else. The more that we can really aim towards these other communities and talk with them and have a dialogue with them and really engage with them, the better off we'll be. The second thing, however, is I think a little bit more, more of a far cry from what we have today, which is that I think there's a lot of ideas in the community and there's a lot of ideas being thrown around. It feels a lot like a tornado. Right now in the Drupal community in terms of what we're thinking about with regards to what Drupal might look like in 10 years or 5 years. If we can coalesce around a single idea that really gives us that vision and gives us that inspiration and really drives people to get really excited and passionate about working on Drupal in ways that they never thought of in really unprecedented fashions, I think that we could actually get this group of volunteers, this group of people who are doing this electively on their own time. Like everyone in this room who's contributed to Drupal has at some point in the past. If we can all coalesce around a single vision, a single idea, a single really interesting dream, I think that we can achieve anything. Anything is possible. And I really do believe that. I do. All right. Thank you very much.
Well, actually, I don't need the microphone. Let's turn this off here.